Welcome to the Smoke and Rope Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Basor, and I'm back this week from the UP. I want to thank Tom and Kevin for holding it down, and Rick Thompson for guest hosting or guest commentating. I wouldn't say that. Kevin did a wonderful job, but hopefully I can keep my job here. But today we're on episode 59, and we're excited to have back one of the originators of the podcast, Sam Rosinski from Fresh Coast. 42 degrees, Fresh Coast Extracts. Sam, thanks for being on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be back.
Cool, Sam. And this week, Tom Beller is off, and we got Kevin at Trude. Kevin, how'd it go last week? What'd you think about doing the hosting?
I think it's safe to say that your job is secure.
That's not
And
what I heard.
that being said, we had a great time. We had some technical difficulties right at the last minute. We had planned for a guest, and they weren't able to make it, so we pivoted literally on the fly with like a minute before we then flipped to having Rick as our guest to put some questions together really quick, and so it actually turned out really well. I was really happy with how it went, and we had a good time, and glad you're back though.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be back. I just wanted before I give Sam the introduction he deserves, I wanted to just reference my experience last week in the UP. We're going to be having somebody on that's from up there, but it was almost surreal. Like it was magical. Like it didn't happen. And we were in Houghton, Crystal Falls, and Iron Mountain, and the staffs were so well trained. The places were so busy. The customers knew about the brand, and it was just everyone was so friendly. It was just an incredible experience to see this part of Michigan, and the amount of people that are coming over from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Dakotas, you name it. It was just it was an amazing trip, and I wanted to thank everyone that we saw up there, and I happy that I have early money on the western side of the UP because it is just it was just a surreal experience, and that's super cool that that's going on in Michigan, and hey, Wisconsin and Minnesota, you're lost every day that goes by, and you guys have horrible cannabis laws. The UP thanks you. So, with that, I wanted to introduce Sam. So, I first met Sam. First saw Sam. We've talked about it before. In a meeting up in Acme, and they were trying to opt in, and Sam was standing up, throwing out facts, talking, great cannabis knowledge, and a young guy up there and passionate, and it was a pretty hostile crowd, and that's when I saw him first, and like, all right, I kind of became on my radar, and then I got a call from Sam and Elliot to come up and help at this meeting up in Leelanau Peninsula, and we went up. They were trying to opt in his farm that he was living on, and it was beautiful, and we've talked about it before, but it was the most hostile, intense meeting I'd ever seen or been a part of, and it was like 110 degrees in this old church, and they brought out there was the DEA, there's ex-DEA, there's the sheriff, the county sheriff, the undersheriff, there was FBI. Don Bailey was there, not supposed to be, saying crazy stuff. It was everybody, and they didn't end up getting them to opt in, but it's for the best. And Sam played a big part early on with Redemption, helping me with my packaging and and even designing my logo. And I give him a lot of credit for that. That wasn't his background, but he had been doing it enough and been experienced at it and helped guide me on that. And that's really why I thought, Sam, it's great to have you back on the show, but also you've been around for the whole packaging part of it, and then through COVID and what's going on and the new regulations, you guys are doing edibles and things like that. So, Sam, really happy that you're back on the show and your guys' success and thank you for helping me early on. And with that, man, why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on up at 42 degrees, and then let's get into the new packaging changes, how it affected you, and how you adjusted.
Yeah, you know, thanks for having me back on. It's back. It's pretty phenomenal to see how far the show. since the first initial days. I hear the measures of comfortability in everyone's voice where now it's becoming more ad lib, the conversation's really starting to flow. The various times that I've, been able to listen to Rick and Kevin and you go back and forth, just everything just becomes better and better each episode. I tip my cap to everyone who's put the show together. And so with that being said, it's pretty refreshing to come back and being on a, we'll say a different side of the microphone. But it's I want to go back to the initial introduction because that is such a monumental occasion on how there was so much opposition in that room that one night in Solon Township in Leelanau County that as we go forward with the motions, this constant dream one nightmare at a time just avails. And I thought about that as a theme to talk about, just recent changes in the MRA regulation, how much cannabis companies have to go through with this, while navigating the seas of change. And so, just such a comfortable way to be introduced to saying, oh, that's right. It doesn't matter how much time goes on. We're always going to be forced with overcoming, some obstacle. And so today, in today's discussion with packaging, it seems to be, what everyone's talking about. Whether it be changes from MRA regulation or the global supply chains that we're trying to fight to get our packaging and our raw materials here so that we can conduct business has been a challenge that, I'm almost certain everyone in this space is being challenged with. And not just our space, but also to the industry as a whole. So, to recap on what you had said, Ryan, yes, my background, it's traditionally in finance, but I came, I came up in a graphic design environment. Both my parents were in graphic design. My brother's a designer. He's a web publisher in New York City. So here I am, a left brain living in a right world. So it was something that I was constantly subjected to. And I realized, as we go forward with license, we're supposed to be creating these brands and differentiated strategies. One of the things where I was able to let my creativity shine through was in the elements of industrial design. And, as we ended up linking up, getting together and discussing this redemption project, I don't know why, but I was on the phone with some of my packaging manufacturers overseas, and we started talking about this benign virus that was called COVID-19. And this was right when we were designing your logo.
Yep.
And so I said, well, interesting inspiration. Let's go with the plague doctor. And
Oh.
I had no idea at that particular point in time. Never, you always hear about viruses hitting, developing nations, and you always say, wow, that's tragic. I feel so fortunate that we live on a different part of the world where it doesn't, things like this don't happen. Well, everything's becoming increasingly globalized. We're seeing that with the environment, the economy, politics, and now even too, we're seeing that with, virology and medicine. So I was shocked to find out that the United States and the world as a whole would be subjected to the COVID-19 virus, and by default, redemption was kind of ideology. There was like it was almost an ideology that was focused into the redemption brand. So I'm not sure if I ever had an opportunity to share that with you, but I figured today was as good a time as ever.
Hey, that's beautiful. I know, and I like to tell people it's like Nostradamus, one of the most famous plague doc. These guys run into situations of great peril and try to find comfort, and they do it in means that are shunned by society. And so it's kind of what we've been doing for decades too. So thanks for that. Sorry to interrupt though.
No, absolutely. And that also strikes at the heart of, when we reconvened when we were in Acme Township, the banter that I always had to utilize was utilizing facts to combat fear. It's, my camera's not on, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, but, at the time I'm not the biggest guy. I'm not the, most, well-renowned, foremost authority on cannabis by all. But, one of the things that we did really want to speak to was the factual basis that embedded in the cannabis industry. And we use that to quell any reluctance that maybe innocent bystanders, but mainly the reluctant and vocal minorities that often face municipalities they constantly occupy, is that they're scared of what they don't know. And it's the same thing with us operators in the space today as we navigate these seas of change. And so, we and a recent MRA bulletin that has disrupted the infusions market. And we're talking about today, brands are forced with, creating some measure of change on their entire packaging concept, or even down to having to reformulate and redesign what their actual infusions look like. And so there's been a lot of speculation as to what the severity is. And I ended up bringing in MICIA director Robin Snyder to help qualify some of these answers. And, there was a lot of this hidden language that was embedded into the initial bill that was largely ambiguous. And the interpretations now we're seeing the MRA is focusing on these interpretations and how they can further refine what is acceptable and what isn't. Formerly, when we would talk to compliance managers such as like Shy Crow and from Metric and anyone else, they would defer to safe business practices as a general rule of thumb. Now we're starting to see with COVID restrictions coming out there, compliance is coming out in full force. They're doing a lot more random visits. They're checking your labels. They're making sure that you got, that there's no bad actors in the space. And one of the first things that we've noticed is we got to make sure that the children are protected. So I think largely when we look at operators in the space, we're starting to see that, every consensus right now that we believe that, one should be ensuring that this medicine is staying out of the hands of children. And we want to operate successful companies. We want to be able to have the flexibility to succeed. Now it's about kind of finding a middle ground. And so I'm not sure how many of the listeners are familiar with this bill. There's a handful of elements right now that are coming out that companies are having to change. Number one, the first thing is we need to, as operators, we need to mitigate any actions that would entice children. We also need to make sure that there is a clear distinction between not medicated infusions. So anything that comes with a slogan or a description that says candy or gummies or any type of confection must have a prominent either THC or marijuana infused in front of it so that there is a clear distinction. Some of the those are some of the larger points in the most recent advisory bulletin, but it even goes down and drills down into how some of the product is manufactured. I think a lot of the operators in the space were cognizant of not making infusions into shapes that would be confused, or the likelihood of confusion would ensue for children saying this is this is for me. The state has been extremely operators not making in shapes such as stars or animal-like figures, any type of planets or any type, I guess, approachable shapes outside of you'd see in standard geometry, and that's a pretty clear no-brainer that most people had shied away from. Now we're seeing a deeper dive into the formulation and the actual forming of these candies that are now we have to start to shy away from candies that would be mimicking, let's say, Reese's peanut butter cups or Twix bars. Making sure that any logos that are, that advertise towards children are also removed. So we're now starting to see what some may call an overreach, getting into and directly affecting the branding identity of some of these companies and how they are creating differentiated products on the shelf. So that's created kind of a hot topic of conversations that we've had here at 42 Days. So
That's pretty yeah, man. We actually had Brisboe on the show right afterwards, and he's doing his podcast tours. We always grab him, and he's always great to have. And and I agree with a lot of the state's points, and even some of the good points you're making. It's on us. And then the counterpoint to that is, which we didn't get into, is like Jamie Lowell so is so vocal about, is, hey, it's still just it's the parents' responsibility, and hey, even if they do get it, it's just marijuana. It's not gonna be that bad. So, anyways, I like to follow that up, and I like to tease Jamie about that a little bit too. So Kevin, you had something?
Yeah, no, it follows right in line with what you're talking about. It's frustrating. I get what they're trying to do, and everybody's trying to protect the kids, and I'm down with that. But why is it that we have to be the ones that shoulder the load of a movement? I don't see them, making warning signs on bullets. I don't see them making you write things like "this is a lethal gun on a gun." It's a gun. We know that. But at the same note, we do have toys all over every store. Toy guns for kids to play with, right? So why is it that marijuana has to be the public enemy number one when it comes to this kind of stuff and have to shoulder the load? I understand we're a new business. I understand people think that there's all kinds of money being made, and so that there is some responsibility for us to take the bull by the horns. But when's enough is enough. That's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing. But I do understand the logic in the sense of trying to keep things away from kids. But to your point, Ryan, to me, it's just like alcohol. It's your responsibility as the adult to make sure that you're, one, supervising your children, and two, keeping things that are dangerous away from them. So I just wanted to make that follow up to you, Ryan.
Yeah, we noticed that when the bulletin came out, the forums for industry specifics, it exploded with like image that is presented in formerly tobacco, but more apparent in today's society is alcohol. You see a lot of this imagery that's just absolutely, cannabis is often villainized, and then there's also, other vices that are out there in the market that have been made popular by pop culture. So the question becomes, and Kevin, I agree 110%. This comes down to the parents being responsible. It's about creating safe access points in the home. And we do understand, especially too with infusions, which was kind of a low-hanging fruit on the compliance, on the MRA's radar, because it is such a similar substance to what children would consume. So I think that's why we were able to fall in line with consensus, especially with my conversations with Robin. I don't think that many people in the association necessarily wanted to revolt against this. Now it's just about how do we make it work. And to touch on what Kevin had said earlier, I think it's largely about education. I think a lot of the people who are shopping at marijuana dispensaries today, they don't have a clue on what best uses, what are best practices. Something that we hear all the time from the MRA, and I think it's up to us to edify consumers as to what best practice. And so if we give people in this industry an opportunity to succeed, I think they will. We've had a chip on our shoulder. I think the people who are on this show and the operators in this space, we've been dealing with, been combating facts versus fears for too many years. Now it's just about extending that level of education back onto the consumer so that we can have a good track record. And I think that will make this industry a success.
I a great format for us to vent and kind of, hey, it's going on 12 straight years of this for me, and then probably more for that for Kevin, and I know you've been around too. So I agree. We just got to keep the pedal to the metal and keep on educating. But sometimes, it's 2021. The information's ready available to anybody that's out there. At some point, it's just cognitive dissonance, or people just don't want to admit that they were ever wrong. But hey, I wanted to ask you, because I've since switched to I've learned about packaging at times. Packaging has been basically the bane of my existence, and the hardest part about this business for me. I feel like I got it under control now, very well. It hasn't been easy, but I switched to all pretty much United States companies just based on COVID, and worrying about when we launched, like you said, COVID hit, and our stuff was coming out of a factory in Wuhan. So that was kind of a triple threat there. So what have you guys done since then? What are you seeing? How are you sourcing, and how have you adjusted?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've recently rolled out a new line of packaging, and so we can, I'll narrate that journey. And you're right, the reason why we switched in the first place was due to fragmented supply chains. not being able to get cost-effective shipping here domestically, it drives up the price. A lot of people get sticker shock on domestic manufacturing here in the United States. Well, there's embedded costs with doing business overseas, and there's opportunity costs, there's shipping costs, and so that's something that has to be weighed with everyone who is faced with trying to secure their supply chains. There was a long-winded battle with us rolling out this packaging. And for those that may or may not know, we recently revamped our select line of product. RL Solutions has as a sponsor for our product line. Really, what we're doing is we're using a recycled hemp paper, and the reason for that is we wanted to create an initiative that reduced our contributions to landfills. And so, in going to that, we started looking at what is our best options to source some of this material. We ended up actually taking things offshore yet again. And that's not to say that I don't have confidence with domestic manufacturing. It was just the companies that we were working with ended up sourcing material and labor outside of the country. So it was there was still an element of global supply chain that was tied in. What we've noticed and what we've done to date with trying to manufacture and transport the packaging to our facility where it's in warehousing, and we have better buffer inventory than we once did, knowing that there's going to be these shortages, is we went with a preferred freight forwarder. So now some cannabis companies that we work with, some clients of ours as well, we've been going in on bulk containers, other cannabis companies, vape cart manufacturers from some of our other affiliates that are in different states. Companies have had to band together to purchase their own shipping containers, to purchase their own cargo planes so they can get things over here. And there's enough interest now where you're starting to see little cooperatives that are starting to pop up. So versus trust the DHL, the UPSs of the world, we're actually starting to go with private freight. And if COVID wasn't enough for us to be challenged, also the Pact Act. For those who don't know about the Pact Act, this has to do with transporting cartomizers, which would be vape cartridges that are empty, through the United States Postal Service, and USPS and FedEx have now all banned those shipments. So it's been quite challenging for a lot of vape cart manufacturers to get consistent supplies of raw materials outside of packaging. So when you piggyback all of these inadvertent challenges onto a unified industry, there's been a lot of consolidation for shipping resources. And so that was one of the ways that we navigated. But in the instance of going back to the MRA bulletin about changing your packaging on the fly, I mean, that's a business killer in some economic circumstances. So for those who have to retool their packaging in companies' cases, their entire product line, that's going to have lasting effects on some of these operators in the space.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that, Andrew Brisboe had mentioned that they are given 6 months for people to make the adjustments to their packaging and things like that. But like Sam, I mean, with the way things have been backed up over time, I mean, who knows sometimes how long it takes to get certain products in, and people have invested a lot of money in that packaging, thinking that they had stability moving forward, and it definitely can cause quite an issue. I did also want to talk to you a little bit about Croptober. It's on its way. Just maybe get some predictions from you on what you think is going to happen with the biomass market, and what kind of products, what type of concentrates the market's kind of trend into.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing this or not, but it seems like for us, we're looking back at historics, and this time last year there was an insatiable demand that could not be, it could not be satisfied. It was incredible, and I think that avaricious nature of dispensaries buying as much as they could in a resource scarce environment last year led to a substantial amount of overbuying when they fell. I think people remember of 2020, and they're taking those habits into 2021. We're noticing that, albeit still standpoint and a distribution standpoint, there wasn't this hockey stick growth curve like we saw this time last year in August. And so buyers are getting smarter. We're seeing a lot more divergence into the distillate market because it was vastly underserved last year. We still saw a spike in pricing. I think this year, Kevin, to answer your question point blank, I think we're going to see a little bit more of a saturated market. We've got more producers coming online in the outdoor space. We've got a wonderful growing climate right now. I think from all accounts right now, if we can keep the storms at bay, we're going to see a very healthy yield on a lot of these outdoor farms. But I also think that we're going to see more experienced demand coming from the retailers. And what I mean by that is I don't think that we're going to see nearly as much increase in sales and then fall with a fall off. I think you're going to still see consistent sales. I just think from the supply side, it's going to be a little bit more crowded out. Um, concerning product types, I think we're still in a distillate rich environment. I think consumers are still more focused on the commodity of distillate versus finished live resin products. We are noticing that a handful of companies out there are switching more to live resin, but again, storage for these for fresh frozen biomass has been difficult. I know for us, we had to increase. We now got 5 reefers on site, and we had to get ours specifically in from Georgia. The tri-state area has all been wiped out, which is normally where we get our rental units from. So, I mean, there's increased demand that's out there. So I think production's going to really kind of dictate where we're at here, and I think the retail is more experienced.
I
Yes.
I like the. I want to. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
I just wanted to say, ask real quick, if you thought that the reason that distillate was moving more than the live resin, was it a price point thing, or was it more of just trying to educate the consumer?
I think you're starting to see right now that the distillate is a little bit more applicable in a wider range of applications. It can be, nano-emulsified into beverages, which I know is a big push for a lot of co-pack in the space. You're seeing it with topicals, transdermals, edibles, things of that nature, and it's got a longer shelf life. So even if they buy it, they can still hold it. I do also agree with the notion that consumers need to be educated on the differences between live resin and distillate, but at the end of the day, it's the 3 Ps, right? It's price, it's potency, and then it's profile. We in the live resin space, we've got a lower potency, a higher price point, and a more profound profile. So again, it comes with the difference.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Who wants to? Once you know about distillate and fake terps put in, why would you ever want to smoke that? But anyways, I got some predictions I want to get on record because I did want to say I was gone last week. I had put it on record a few times on the show that I said July was going to be the biggest month ever and around 165 to 175, and we hit 171 in sales in July. So I also want to put it on record. August is right with it, but um, I think distillate prices in December, January are going to be down to 8, maybe $7 a kilo. I think frozen market will be down, more along the lines of the 160, $160.
You meant 7 a gram, right? Not a kilo.
$7,000.
There you go.
Sorry.
Okay. There.
Yeah. Sorry, I got talking there, but I just feel like a lot of what Sam touched on is correct. Last year there was other factors. October 1st was the end of when caregivers could put into the processing market, and there was a huge buy up of spending of money. And then there was also shortage of flour at times where people would go out and buy whole crops, and that's changed. Now if they're buying whole crops, it's a worked out deal, and it is more mature, and there's some other factors. But we really saw the retail stores, the price as far as from Croptober, their sales slip from everyone smoking the outdoor, and that created that storm. So I don't think it's going to be as noticeable this year, but maybe we can push through with a lot of great fall and winter tourism. But we shall see. But prices are falling, and it's great. We're kind of taking that approach over here because with redemption, because we've always wanted to try to have a really good product that people can afford and compete with the black market and the gray market. I mean, that's the name of the game. So excited about that. Wanted to ask you another question, Sam, before we get going. Most people don't know. I didn't know like how big a deal packaging was. Now I know there's why there's a major at Michigan State, and why it's a big deal. like what the scale and the scope of what you guys have grown into. Like, how many employees do you have packaging? Like, what, how big a space, and what does that look like before we go?
Oh, it's an incredible component to our business. And to answer your question point blank, right now we've got 103 employees in our facility. Our packaging team is a little over 30 minus, depending on our hiring cycle and where we have them allocated, just for our dabbable products. We also have another 18 to 20, depending on where they're at in the value stream, just for our department. The switch that right now is we've been implementing a lot of automation, and that's in an effort to continue to promote within our company more experienced users, operators, and employees, but also to keep pace with demand. What we've noticed is the extraction component is what we feel the most comfortable with. The packaging and the distribution side of things is where things get wonky. Number one, oftentimes a client will provide their own packaging. And this is an effort to have both sides kind of save a little bit of coin in that process. But, as we've learned, we're subjected to third party timelines. The other component of it is how do you create bespoke products for a number of competitors that all want to be differentiated from one another, but we have to scale each of those businesses simultaneously. And just like with Redemption, other clients that we've worked with in the past is we have ahead of what the expected production is because we have to be ready and comfortable with that surge in demand when it gets to our. So we have to kind of retool our operations well in advance of when we see the expectation of demand hit, which has proven to be a little bit of a challenge. So we've brought on a process engineer. We brought on a director of supply chain who was actually was working in Minnesota in a cannabis company. He left from Minnesota, just to touch base on what your intro said. He left because, Michigan was a lot more of a promising market where he could actually operate within, reasonable laws of capitalism and a free market. So I thought that was worth a mention there. But a lot of what he did was focus on the packaging and distribution side of the supply chain. And what we found is creating like choke points in our value stream. So common entry and exit points for when we can have customized packaging go through a particular process. If we can homogenize solutions for them, let's say, low tech label applicators, or if we're able to push them into a certain style of cartridge that we're able to automate. It's all those little non-obvious improvements that we can make that make the process a lot smoother. So for any co-packager or co-manufacturer, look to the unesthetic components of your value stream. That's usually where a lot of the value can be unlocked. And so we've been learning every step of the way to continue to perfect our business, perfect our supply chain, manage our inventory. Those have all been learning lessons that we take with us, and from today and onward into the future.
Man, yeah, no, that was fun listening to kind of how you progressed and thinking back. It was almost like it was great to have you on the show today, Sam. Just to catch up and hear all this. So we are running short on time. I wanted to let Kevin have any final thoughts here and say goodbye.
Yeah, Sam, appreciate having you on the show again, man. It's been too long. It's been, I don't even know, more than half a year since we've chatted. So great catching up. Your insight is spot on. And yeah, appreciate you coming on, and hope everything's well. Hope everybody at Fresh Coast is doing good, and pass on our well wishes.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Kevin. We got to get out on the golf course sometime.
I
That's
agree.
yeah, it's been too long. So next time when you're up, we'll have to go play around. Ryan, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And yeah, happy to be back and sitting in a different chair here. But looking forward to the future. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sam, for coming on, and Kevin, and just great hearing that final word about Fresh Coast taking talent from Minnesota. We're seeing a lot of that. It's great to see a Michigan company that's owned by Michigan guys and girls like Fresh Coast continue to thrive, and I love this market. I'm still a little, in La La Land from the UP. It was so surreal. But we're blessed to be in Michigan, and blessed to be in this market and being from Michigan. So with that, we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Ryan.